Brock Lesnar's name is synonymous with chaos, power, and spectacle. Though his UFC career was relatively brief, it was packed with some of the most unforgettable moments in heavyweight history. Lesnar, a former WWE superstar and NCAA wrestling champion, entered the octagon with an aura of invincibility and a physique that dwarfed even the largest of heavyweights. From his explosive debut to his championship reign and dramatic comebacks, Lesnar's finishes were not just victories, they were statements of raw, unfiltered violence. In this video, we're ranking every brutal and insane Brock Lesnar UFC finish, breaking down what made each one so memorable and why they still echo in the halls of MMA legend. Before we jump in, a quick request: if you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing. It's just one click for you, but it means the world to us. Thanks for the support. Now let's get started. The early days, from wrestling ring to the octagon. Brock Lesnar's transition from professional wrestling to mixed martial arts was met with skepticism and anticipation in equal measure. His MMA debut came in 2007 at K1 Dynamite, USA, where he steamrolled Min Soo Kim with a barrage of punches that forced a submission by strikes in the first round. While this wasn't a UFC bout, it set the tone for Lesnar's approach. Overwhelming force, relentless pressure, and the willingness to finish fights with authority. The MMA world took notice, and soon the UFC came calling. The first taste of defeat and the birth of a monster, Lesnar's UFC debut was against the crafty veteran Frank Mir at UFC 81. The fight was a whirlwind. Lesnar took Mir down immediately and unleashed a torrent of ground and pound, but his inexperience showed when he left his leg exposed, allowing Mir to secure a knee bar submission. This loss, however, did not break Lesnar. Instead, it fueled his transformation into one of the most terrifying finishers the sport had ever seen. UFC 87, the Heath Herring beatdown. Lesnar's first UFC win came against Heath Herring at UFC 87. From the opening bell, Lesnar's power was on full display. He landed a massive right hand that sent Herring tumbling across the cage. A moment that is still replayed in UFC highlight reels. For 3 rounds, Lesnar dominated Herring with takedowns and ground control, battering him with heavy strikes. Although the fight went to a decision, the sheer brutality of the beating left Herring battered and marked the beginning of Lesnar's reputation as a heavyweight destroyer. This fight was a warning to the division. Brock Lesnar was not just hype, he was a force of nature. UFC 91, claiming the crown against Randy Couture. The next chapter in Lesnar's UFC saga was nothing short of historic. At UFC 91, he faced Randy Couture, a legend and 5-time UFC champion. The stakes were enormous. The heavyweight title was on the line, and Lesnar was still a relative newcomer. Couture tried to use his experience and wrestling acumen to neutralize Lesnar's size and strength, but the physical disparity was overwhelming. In the second round, Lesnar landed a thunderous right hand that dropped Couture, followed by a series of brutal hammer fists that forced the referee to step in. With that finish, Lesnar became the UFC Heavyweight Champion in just his 4th professional fight, a feat that stunned the MMA world and solidified his status as a crossover superstar. UFC 100, the savage revenge on Frank Mir. If there was ever a fight that defined Brock Lesnar's brutality, it was his rematch with Frank Mir at UFC 100. The build-up was intense, fueled by personal animosity and trash talk. Lesnar was determined to avenge his only career loss, and he did so with ruthless efficiency. From the outset, Lesnar took Mir down and smothered him with his wrestling. What followed was a relentless ground and pound assault. Lesnar trapped Mir against the cage and unleashed a barrage of punches that left Mir bloodied and helpless. The referee mercifully stopped the fight in the second round, but not before Lesnar had made his point. His post-fight celebration and infamous speech only added to the spectacle, but it was the finish itself, violent, dominant, and utterly one-sided, that remains etched in UFC history as one of the most brutal heavyweight stoppages ever. UFC 116, the Shane Carwin comeback. Lesnar's title defense against Shane Carwin at UFC 116 was a war of attrition and willpower. Carwin, known for his devastating first-round finishes, nearly ended Lesnar's reign in the opening 5 minutes. He dropped Lesnar with uppercuts and unleashed a relentless barrage of punches on the ground. Most fighters would have been finished, but Lesnar survived, weathering the storm with remarkable resilience. In the second round, the tide turned. Carwin was exhausted from his onslaught and Lesnar capitalized. He took Carwin down, methodically advanced position, and locked in a tight arm triangle choke. Carwin had no choice but to tap and Lesnar roared in victory. This finish was not just brutal in its technique, it was dramatic, showcasing Lesnar's ability to endure punishment and come back to finish a dangerous opponent. UFC 200, the Mark Hunt mauling, overturned. Lesnar's return to the UFC at UFC 200 was one of the most anticipated comebacks in MMA history. Facing the heavy-handed Mark Hunt, Lesnar used his wrestling to control the fight, repeatedly taking Hunt down and punishing him with the ground and pound. While Lesnar did not secure a finish, his dominance was clear. The fight was later overturned to a no contest due to a failed drug test, but the performance itself, especially the brutal ground control, reminded everyone of Lesnar's unique ability to impose his will on even the most dangerous strikers. The downfall, facing Velasquez and Overeem. Not every Lesnar fight ended with his hand raised, but even his losses were marked by brutality, this time with Lesnar on the receiving end. Against Cain Velasquez at UFC 121, Lesnar started strong, but was overwhelmed by Velasquez's speed and striking, suffering a TKO in the first round. His final UFC bout against Alistair Overeem at UFC 141 was even more decisive. Overeem battered Lesnar with knees and a vicious kick to the body, finishing him with a flurry of punches. These losses signaled the end of Lesnar's MMA run, but they also underscored the unforgiving nature of heavyweight combat. What made Lesnar's finishes so brutal? Several factors contributed to the brutality of Brock Lesnar's UFC finishes. First and foremost was his size and athleticism. Lesnar was one of the largest and most explosive athletes to ever compete in the UFC. His NCAA wrestling pedigree allowed him to dictate where the fight took place, often dragging opponents into deep waters on the ground. Once on top, Lesnar's ground and pound was relentless. His fists were so large he needed custom gloves, and when he landed, the impact was devastating. Lesnar's mentality also played a role. He fought with a chip on his shoulder, eager to prove doubters wrong and silence critics who questioned his legitimacy as a mixed martial artist. This drive translated into a finishing instinct. Lesnar rarely coasted to decision victories, preferring instead to end fights emphatically whenever possible. Conclusion: the Beast's lasting mark. As we look back on every brutal and insane Brock Lesnar UFC finish, one thing becomes clear. Lesnar was more than just a spectacle. He was a finisher, a champion, and a force of nature whose legacy will endure for generations of fight fans. His UFC highlights remain must-watch moments, and his name will forever be linked to the most violent and unforgettable finishes in the history of the octagon. Whether it was the savage ground and pound against Frank Mir, the thunderous knockout of Randy Couture, or the dramatic submission of Shane Carwin, Brock Lesnar's UFC career was a masterclass in brutality, power, and the relentless pursuit of victory. If you want more videos like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's just a tiny click for you, but it makes a massive difference for us. Thanks for supporting the channel.